Hello there, everyone, and welcome to the first Biomass Connect webinar. My name is Kevin Lindegaard. My company is called Crops for Energy Limited, and I'll be facilitating this session. If you're thinking of planting Willow or Miscanthus, then this is definitely the right place to be. I've got with me two biomass energy crop influencers who've been there and done it, encountered all of the eventualities, trodden the hard yards, learned all the lessons, and gained all the wisdom that they are now going to pass on to you. Now, I can't say how important that is, because with Willow Miscanthus, energy crops in general, you're making a 20 to 30 year decision. Now, there are very few 20 to 30 year decisions that you make in life. Hopefully your marriage, and also something like a house purchase. But apart from that, I'm struggling to think of any. But really, you really do have to make that right choice when you start with Willow and Miscanthus. So the guys are going to give you the lowdown and make sure that you make the right choices. Next slide, please. Thank you. So before I start, we're just going to have a little bit of background about the Biomass Connect project. So this is part of a large £37 million programme called the Biomass Feedstocks Innovation Programme that is funded by the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Now, there's 12 innovation projects, and then there's the Biomass Hub, which is Biomass Connect. Next slide, please. The three objectives of Biomass Connect are principally to create 8 hub site demonstration sites that will be able to be used to show 11 different types of biomass crops. And then to use these in a network of spoke sites as well to provide demonstrations of existing practice and new innovations that are being created as part of this programme. And then the third thing is to create this all singing, all dancing, one-stop shop, a website that is like the Wikipedia for biomass and energy crops, the go-to place, which will not only have all of the information about how to grow these things, the best practice and all of that, but also all of the portfolio of our outreach events, which will be many over the 3 years of this project. Next slide, please. So here's the hub site locations. You'll see that there's 4 in England, 2 in Scotland, and 1 each in Wales and Northern Ireland there. And 5 of those sites will have the very latest varieties for Miscanthus and Willow. So near market genotypes as well as the latest varieties. So really great stuff there. Next slide, please. You really must check out the Biomass Connector website. Now, I've mentioned this is going to be the portal where you go to get all your information. At the moment, it's in its infancy, but go and have a look at it and check out and see what you like, and so you can navigate around quite easily. Next slide, please. But the most important thing is to go to the to this link here and sign up to our newsletter. Now, the newsletter is not going to be spam. It's going to be hot off the press, really important, bespoke information on biomass and energy crops. Comes straight to your inbox every 2 months. And if you want to know anything about the biomass strategy, ELMS, all of those sort of things, plus the events that we're going to be running, then you've really got to get that sign up page done, because we cannot contact you unless you opt in because of GDPR and all that. Next slide, please. So we've got 2 very experienced gentlemen here with me today, Mike Cooper of Miscanthus Nursery and David Watson of Energy Crops Consultancy Limited. But before I allow them to tell you exactly how they go about it, I just want to provide a few ground rules about these events. So we are recording this. It's going to go online later, so you can watch again, or hopefully you're going to be out there now watching this in the future and gaining some information. There's going to be a Q&A, so if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function. I will be facilitating the questions and answers. So everyone else will be muted, just for simplicity. If we become overwhelmed with questions, then what we'll do is we'll collect all of those and we'll provide some written answers that will go hand in hand with the webinar on the website. The plan is to be a 45-minute session. Please bear with us if we just slightly overrun because of my extensive preamble. That's the plan. So first and foremost, Mike is going to talk about how to start off on the right foot with Miscanthus. Now, I can't say this for many people, but Mike is one of the few current players in the game that has been in the energy crop sphere longer than me. His time with Miscanthus goes back to 1984 when he saw the first UK plantation of Miscanthus being planted. So I think it's fair to say that Mike has been there, done it, and bought the T-shirt. So over to you, Mike. Please tell us how you go about planting Miscanthus.
Thank you, Kevin. Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for everybody for turning out to listen. I hope you find it of interest. This is not the definitive planting regime, but you need to tailor it for your own farms, really. So as we go through it, you'll probably sort that for yourselves. Next slide, please. Okay, so probably the first consideration of all when you're going to plant applies to Miscanthus or short-term rotational copper spreaders. Your neighbours, don't go and plant it right in front of their front window. Just have some consideration to where you're going to plant it. So don't restrict their view. Field access is extremely important. Minimum 12-foot gateways, 12-foot access to the field. If you go metric, actually, you can get up to a 13-foot with a 4-foot gate. Look at the aspect of the field. If you're going to grow it on a north-facing field, it is not going to get as much sunlight and as much heat as it would do on a southern slope, but not impossible to grow in that situation. Height above sea level, we've got crops successfully growing at 1,200 feet. I have to say they are sort of south-facing and they're wet as well, but they do extremely well. Previous cropping, you must consider this. If it's been permanent pasture, then that sort of sets out a new set of rules. Permanent pasture, derelict land, they're going to have pests. So anything 15 years old, 15 years and over, you're going to need to watch, or you're going to need to control them. Also, if it's over 15 years old and you've not had a management plan for it for the last 15 years, then you may need an environmental assessment. Give plenty of time because they do take ages to get this job done. Also, you need to think about your other environmental schemes, stewardship, organic. Just plan that in when you're looking at these fields to plant. Soil type, Miscanthus will grow on most soil types. It'll obviously grow better on south-facing fields that are wet and fairly heavy, as opposed to try and grow them on a very light sand. Rainfall, obviously water is a real determining factor on Miscanthus yield. Miscanthus is extremely efficient. In fact, it's actually 4 times more efficient than wheat at using water. So, but just bear that one in mind. And one I tripped across the other day is just check around the fields. If it's your own farm, you're going to know immediately whether you've got beehives. But we tripped across one the other day where somebody had put some beehives the other side of the hedge, and I hadn't noticed them. Fortunately, we have all sorted, but could have been a bit of a disaster. Next slide, please. So if you're starting off with permanent pasture, then you're going to have to watch out for leather jackets. They could well be a problem in long-term grass. Also, fruit-fly wireworm. These things live on dead material in the soil. They tend to appear in the spring, but there's several generations, so the damage could go on and on. There's no chemical treatment. The only way to do it is to use a sacrifice crop. Try and follow in after an arable crop somewhere along the line, because at least they can control some form of wireworm, certainly. One other one just to watch out is, which I've tripped across just lately, where people have had shoot game covers and they've had brassicas in them for the past 4 or 5 years, quite noticeable. We've planted Miscanthus and literally it's grown either side, but it hasn't grown where the brassica is. So I think there's a fair bit of sort of fusarium and stuff in the soil, which is causing a bit of a problem. Just watch that one. Post-emergence pests, really rabbits, hares, deer, probably a few reports of wild boar as well in occasional places, but they will have a good go at the crop just in the first year. The only way to keep them out is fence them or use garlic spray or barrier. Barrier is extremely good, probably more persistent than garlic. Next slide, please. So you've now decided on the field, you've taken all these things into consideration. So one of the things you should actually do straight away is get some soil samples taken, do a standard soil test, but also do a carbon check plus as well. We use NRM. They do the carbon check and carbon status and the organic status, so well worth doing. Minimum nutrient requirement when planting, certainly 1+ for phosphate, 1+ for potash. pHs need to be above 5.8 and ideally below 8, so a good spectrum of pH. If you're planting on reclaimed land, contaminated land or anything like that, then we can get around that problem by applying something like red media. But if you're in that situation, please come back and ask before you do it, because it's a bit of a technical issue. Next slide, please. So in the autumn, we need to get the grass or the grass weeds sprayed off in the autumn before planting in the spring. It's also an ideal time to actually get your land flat lifted. Just get it sorted, because the crop's going to be down for 20 years. Might as well make sure the soil's in good condition before you start. If you're going to plough in the autumn, allow the grass to die off before ploughing at about 7 inches deep, something like that, 180 mil. Use skims to make sure you bury all the trash so that you've got a nice clean furrow. If you can get an early ploughing, if you can get it ploughed following something like winter barley, for instance, and then you've got an opportunity of getting it ploughed, sprayed off and ploughed in the late summer, then it's a good idea to maybe just work the ground and plant a bit, something like a mustard crop, just as a sacrifice crop, and that will add some fertility to the ground. If you could get grassland ploughed, permanent grassland ploughed, and plant mustard on top of that, that really will begin to sort the wire worm and leather jackets as well. If you're late ploughing, then leave it on the furrow over winter. Next slide, please. Soil temperature needs to be a minimum of 8 degrees centigrade before you start planting Miscanthus. And you need to get a good fine marble or less than marble size seed bed. The way we do this is that we tend to power harrow twice, normally the day before planting, and then for the second time just in front of the planter, providing we can obtain a good enough seed bed. We have got Miscanthus planters available for getting the crop in the ground. Once you've got it in, most importantly, Cambridge roller. Don't go over the heavy roller, Cambridge roller, just to make sure you've got maximum soil to rhizome adhesion. Next slide, please. Spraying wise, obviously sort of quite a broad spectrum here, but pre-emergence you can use Stompaqua. Once the crops come through, then if you just got charlock, fat hen, nettles, that sort of thing, MCPA. Once you move into docks and chickweed, then you need to probably move up to a CMPP type product. But if you've got the polygonums, red shank, knotgrass, bindweed, etc., then you need to move to Harmony, plus maybe CMPP or MCPA, depending on the weed spectrum. Make sure that, and use an agronomist probably to give you the recommendation, but make sure that you are using EMU approved products. If you have a grass weed problem, there is really no way of treating those in the emerged crop until it goes into the dormant stage during the winter. Next slide, please. So some sort of do's and don'ts really. My biggest one of all is whatever you do, please do not underestimate the importance of seedbed preparation. It is probably the most important part of getting Miscanthus rhizome growing. Do not expose the unplanted rhizomes to long-term heat and sun when you're planting. Make sure they're covered or bring them out as you need them. Please don't heavy roll after planting. If you need a heavy roller to break the soil down, then your seedbed wasn't ready to plant anyway. Don't bother to apply a pre-emergence if rain isn't imminent. These sorts of products do rely on good soil moisture. So if you've got a dry seedbed, don't do it. Do not plough permanent pasture in the spring and try and plant in the spring, same spring. You will be really asking for trouble with pests. Do ensure that you create this maximum soil to rhizome adhesion. I can't emphasize that enough. It is the most important part about it. Do only use approved pre and post emergent chemicals. Do control broadleaf weeds where possible in the first year of planting. It will make a difference to your crop going forward to second year harvest. Weeds will hold it back. And do control grass weeds before planting. That's the easiest time of all to do them. Next slide, please. Miscanthus Nursery tends to work with the potential grower all the way through from his interest through to his final market, because at the end of the day, no two farms are the same. There's not a one fit answer for every single one. So the grower will normally know his land and know how to prepare it. He knows his soil, when to hit it, when not to hit it. This way round, our staff to get to know the field as well for following visits. So what we do is we tend to work together. So if we're going to plant for you, then we'll work it out for you and come up with the best way of preparing your seed bed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mike. That's really comprehensive. Really enjoyed that. I've got a few burning questions here. So for the non-farmers amongst us, and I'm sure there's a few of those watching, you've used a few sort of terms that might be a little bit tricky there. So first and foremost, what did you mean by a carbon check plus soil test?
All right. One of the issues I think we've all picked up, those have just been long-term carbon, long-term perennial bioenergy crops, is the fact that we've not got a carbon status in the ground before we started. And I think future carbon payments are going to be based on some form of proof about how your carbon is increasing in the soil by growing these sorts of crops. So it's really to get yourself a baseline of your carbon status in the ground before you start.
Okay. And you also mentioned two things. One was red media and the other one was flat lifted. Could you explain those terms, please?
Certainly. A flat lift is basically like a subsoiler. It tends to sort of work on 750 mil spacings, and you can go down to about sort of deep, something like that. Basically, you need to shatter any hands or any hard bits in the ground.
I think you were just faded out when you said the distance there. Could you say how deep?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to quickly convert my inches back to meters, but about 24 inches, something like that. They will go down to. Yeah, right. It's just to get in underneath that soil pan if you've got one, or plough pan if you've got one there. Red media is basically a product that you can apply to contaminated land, which will allow these sorts of crops to establish themselves.
Okay, well, what does that actually consist of?
It's a form of aluminium sulfate.
All right, okay, great. Lovely. Okay, well, now moving on to Willow, and David Watson of Energy Crops Consultancy is going to talk to us about that. Now, of course, these crops are quite similar in lots of different ways, but in lots of ways, but there are subtle differences as well. And David is going to talk about his long experience of being involved in short rotation coppice. He's not quite as long in the tooth, sorry, Mike, as you, but he's got a 30-year history of being involved in farming, and He's worked in that time. He's worked for the Cooperative, the National Trust, Newcastle University, and Frontier Agriculture. He's got over a decade's experience of working with short rotation coppers at Newcastle University, and has been working with ECC since the summer. So over to you, David. You're going to tell us how to start out on the right foot with short rotation coppers Willow.
Yes, thank you very much, Kevin. And as Mike said, it's great to be here, and thank you everybody for tuning in. Just following on from your preamble, Kevin, that my involvement with Willow started at Cockle Park Farm, which is actually one of the hub sites for Biomass Connect, and purely coincidentally, that we're actually harvesting the willow crop that was established as part of another project, the Creel project, which was the Centre for Renewable Energy from the Land, which was the reason I moved from the National Trust to go and work for Newcastle University. And while the Creel project actually floundered, as some of these things do, the interest in renewable energy continued with the university, and it's great to see them involved in Biomass Connect and being a hub site. Anyway, that's me, David Watson. As Kevin said, I've been with Energy Crops Consultancy. We're based in Harrogate since July this year. But as I say, I've worked with Willow for sort of the last 10 years. Next slide, please. What does ECC do? Well, we basically do everything that you would expect people to be involved with short rotation coppers, whether it be willow, poplar, or any other the woody or fibrous crops that are coming onto the market now. We get involved with that, and increasingly now with agroforestry. Today, again, if you look there at that diagram, what we would do is sit down with growers, design the best plan, look at the right varieties and end markets. Then obviously we go into the planting phase. So what we're looking at today's talk is point 1 and 2. Get point 1 and 2 right, as Mike said throughout his presentation, then that should result in 3. And then obviously the end goal is making sure that you maximize production at number 4 there with instant wood chip production. Next slide, please. So starting off on the right foot, the big issue always is with short rotation coppers willow is people view it as a low input crop. But as Kevin alluded to, it's going to be there for 30 years. So really, get the step 1 and 2 that I talked about just before, get that right, and everything else will follow suit. Quite a lot of the time, people sort of get off on the wrong foot to start with, because they're limited to the alternative uses that you have for fields, and therefore, oh well, nothing else will go, let's stick willow in, and that's not obviously not the right approach. And then move on to an environmental impact assessment, because quite a lot of the time as well, it's possibly been a field that's been down to grass for 20 or 30 years or longer, and then all of a sudden somebody gets out of bed and says, we should do something better with that field, let's grow willow. And again, an environmental impact assessment could be necessary. For the same reason, you've got to be able to use machinery to farm willow. Again, both obviously for planting, but particularly at harvest and then dispatching the crop. And then quite often there are other reasons why people would like to grow willow, but better reasons is to control soil erosion, bioremediation, the removal of pollution, and in some instances actually crops that have suffered drought stress. Everybody always presumes that willow will go and ruin your drains and loves water, but actually willow is quite drought tolerant as well. What sort of soils? Well, the good thing about willow is you can grow it in pretty much any soil at all, heavy clays, silts and loams. Light sands, yeah, you can do it, but despite what I've just said about drought stress, it probably isn't something you'd probably set out to do if you had the choice. Again, it's the same thing as Mike said about soil analysis. The first one is obviously pH for lime. Again, between 5.5 and 7.5. P and K, both in RB209. SRC Willow is classed as an arable crop, so it's covered by RB209. And again, the indices are the same, 1 or 1 plus or above for both P and K. And then, as Mike said, do an organic matter test. You call it carbon check, Mike. But at the end of the day, again, as we move forward, the importance of carbon for energy crops is going to become more and more important. And in some respects, as time moves on, the likelihood is if you're putting a field into any crop at all, but particularly long-term crops and the chance of sequestering carbon, your best friend could well be your field with a low organic matter, because you'll be showing significant improvements as you grow the crop. You need to take into account previous uses. Again, I've already mentioned about the problems sometimes with permanent pasture. People sort of see it as an opportunity to try and make something out of a grass that's probably been particularly unproductive. Again, in arable crops, in an arable crop rotation, well, it's going to be there for 30 years more than likely, but it can be taken out again. But there is an opportunity to use arable crops, as a good entry into willow following grassland, if you like. And then we find we do an awful lot of willow onto reclaimed land, maybe not brownfield, but again, the crop that I talked about before at Newcastle University, that is actually grown on a field that was reclaimed open cast from the old Butterwell open cast site. Next slide, please. I think when you're going to create a seed bed, and the good thing for me about this afternoon is I got to look at Mike's presentation before I did my own. And Mike used the word seed bed, and I've wasted far too much time wondering what we should actually call what we plant willow into, because it's not really a seed bed. But at the end of the day, that's what it is really. And what you're trying to do is set out as good a growing environment from the crop as we can manage. Get rid of all the crop residues, carry out cultural control of weeds and any soil-borne pests, because at the end of the day, for any crop at all, there is no day more important than its birthday, the day it goes into the ground. And if anybody really wanted any advice about planting anything, I think what you've got to do is go to the soil, look at it, and say to myself, if I was a willow rod, would I want to be planted into there? If I was a wheat seed, would I want to be planted in there? If I was a Miscanthus rhizome, would I be happy in there or not? And if the answer is no, don't plant it, put it right. There are obviously practical considerations when you do that. There are certain things you have to do because of the spatial layout of the crop and getting the right plant populations. And there are other crop husbandry activities. And again, the other thing is you need to make it level and make it as good a seed bed as you possibly can, because you're going to be going through it for 30 years. And nobody wants to be bouncing over wheelings on headlands and things like that for 30 years. Next slide, please. So getting off on the right foot. Realistically, we plan from mid-March to the end of June. But the most important thing about grassland or arable crops is to kill all the weeds. And in grassland, in an ideal situation, what you want to do is kill the weeds in autumn and then plough it and leave the ploughing over winter. In practice, that rarely happens, basically because people say, well, we're not going to be planting the willow until mid-March. That means we can keep the sheep on until January, and then we'll spray it off and then we'll plough it. And I think, yeah, okay, that's fair enough. But again, you're trying to make a good job. Get stuff glyphosated off, or glyphosate and 2,4-D, which I think is a product called Kyleo, which just kills off some of the more persistent weeds, and get things ploughed when you can actually do it the best job, which will vary from farm to farm and will vary from year to year. This year, it probably would have been ideal to have ploughed, to get stuff sprayed off in September, get it ploughed in October, and the last few days you probably would have been able to knock the seed bed down a little bit with a cultivator on a frost, and then that would leave you in a perfect position to do any secondary cultivation in mid-March before planting. Next slide, please. Again, it's interesting. I've done a table here, and they're almost identical, really, in that what I've said is, again, what we've just said is desiccate the grass layer, clear it up with a total non-selective weed killer, and then plough or decultivate. And again, I always think it's interesting that we sit here and we're talking about crops that really have a great environmental profile. And if you moved over to mainstream agriculture, the word plough is almost seen as sort of a dirty word in some situations, really. But it's back to this business of it being there for 30 years. Now, I would say in a pasture situation, if you want to get rid of all the trash, all the dead lay and everything else, there's no better tool than a plough. In an arable situation, there probably is no better tool than a plough, but there are so many variations on deep cultivators now that give you the added benefit that it'll subsoil as well as it'll sort of loosen at depth as well as cultivate, and you haven't got the trash to get rid of. And we have got some successful willow crops in that have been established after deep cultivation rather than ploughing. And again, that's sort of been left till sort of almost immediately before before planting. Again, secondary cultivation. Again, you're still going to want the same end result. You want a fine seed bed, predominantly for the pre-emergence herbicide to work well. And I'll explain about that in a little bit more in a moment. Now, I put subsoil later than Mike. I think, again, it's back to when can you do a good job. But in my secondary cultivation, almost inevitably, that will involve the same as Mike, a power harrow. Now, another reason why we plough and power harrow is because if we're going to do it for a farmer, the one recipe that we'll always be successful with, no matter where we go or what we do, is plough and power harrow. Now, as I say, there are rafts of different cultivators, rafts of different ploughs, whatever, on the market. And if you're a farmer or a grower and you want to do it yourself because you know your land and you have a better system, then that's great. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. But the one thing we know, we turn up with a plough and a power harrow, we're going to be successful. And that the seed bed is going to be of sufficient quality that we'll be able to that the pre-emergence herbicide will work well. So again, the thing about subsoil and after that is that both ploughs and power harrows can form pans. And if you've got the chance, then maybe it's a better idea to subsoil when you've done that with the big heavy tractors and then go in and loosen the pan that they may have created as well. Roll. In terms of rolling, again, I'll say Cambridge rolling. I'm absolutely obsessed with rolling, really. I think it's cheap. It does a lovely job. It helps the plant to get good rod to soil contact, and it might control some soil-borne pests. And then we would come in with a step planter. It basically cuts the rods 20 centimetres long and then pushes in the ground. Now, I would say there's maybe not really any need to roll pre-planting, but it's great if you can. But definitely post-planting, we like to see a Cambridge roll again to improve the soil contact with the rod and again to assist the pre-emergence herbicide. Next slide, please. Oh, one more thing about planting. The greatest thing that was ever invented for planting willow, in my view and in the view of any harvester driver, was RTK. If you can get nice straight lines of willow and a big headland, it really pays dividend when you come to harvest. Again, everybody likes to see pictures of tractors. So there's a nice picture of a plough. If you look at the back furrow, the bottom of there, approximately 6 inches deep, that's where you would get the plough, the pan. And then the next picture is of a power harrow where you can't really see the pan. But again, it's nice to see some tracks of somebody taking soil compaction seriously. Next slide, please. That's a picture of a subsoiler on the left of your screen. Again, something they can get down and shatter and loosen the pan. And again, there's my favorite tool in the world, Cambridge rollers, and that's even nicer because it's got leveling boards on the front to make give you a nice level finish. Next slide, please. Stones. Now, stones can be a big problem. Now, I was really impressed with Mike's presentation that he had a mechanical stone picker. They're few and far between in the Northeast. So that's the sort of stone picking that we do. And it's quite interesting that when Neil Watkins first approached me about joining ECC, he mentioned stone picking. And I told him my stone picking days were long behind me. I would say that if you have a stone problem, one of the best things you can do is actually consider stone picking to be a separate operation to anything else you do. It's not the picking the stones that you get sick of, it's getting on and off the tractor that you get sick of. So stones and other detritus, again, if you're working on open cast as we do, there's always a lot of winding wire and stuff like that. They can be a nightmare for the planter, and they definitely will be a nightmare for the harvester. The one good thing about stones in Miscanthus and short rotation coppice willow, with them being long-term crops, 20 and 30 years, it means that if anybody remembers the cartoonist Henry Brewis, he was convinced there was a stone god, and every year, no matter how many stones you picked off a field, the stone god would push more up. That doesn't happen with long-term crops. Once you pick them off, they stay off forever. Weed control, we kind of limited post-planting. That's why getting your glyphosate and getting a clean start is so important. We stuck with Stomp Aqua and Flexidor. Stomp Aqua is reasonably priced. Flexidor is expensive and it really needs excellent conditions. It needs moisture, and this is why, again, I'm so passionate about getting that last roll in. You can use curb at this time of year, but generally that's something you would do post-harvest, so it's not something you would use in the establishment phase. And as I say, like Miscanthus, all the chemicals you use are generally reliant on EAMUs. And that picture there is my pride and joy, our recently acquired sprayer, to allow us to take that job in-house as well, so we can hit the right conditions. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. So Energy Crops Consultancy, we work with growers again from the initial inquiry all the way to the final market. Willow's great in that there's new markets opening up all the time. There are new techniques of growing, and there's always new varieties being developed, and the grower can opt to do as much or as little of the land preparation as they wish. From our point of view, when we plan for a grower, we undertake to visit that crop at least twice a year, and we're always on hand to provide support. So I'd just like to thank you all very much for listening. Next slide, please. And just say I hope you all have a very, very Merry Christmas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. That was excellent. Brilliant. We're keeping to time really well here. I've got a couple of questions for you on Willow. There probably will be some more coming through as well. In fact, I can see that some are coming there, which is good. What I would like to say is that you didn't really deal much with pests in your presentation there. So what could you do now that certain chemicals are not available to deal with things like the leather jackets and those sort of beasties, and then also perhaps later beasties that are slightly bigger, like rabbits and hares?
Right, okay. Well, we'll start with the soil-borne pests and diseases, really. The soil-borne pests, we're not left with any chemical control, so really it's all down to cultural control, which again is where another reason why I would suggest that the cultivation strategy, which again, once upon a time you maybe would have referred to as a Bundesbank strategy, is probably a good way to deal with it. If you can do something to bring grubs and things to the surface to allow birds to graze on them and you know, encourage cultural control, that's really the only way of dealing with any sort of soil-borne pests at the moment. Rabbits and hares, again, fencing is probably the ultimate control in terms of rabbit control, and deer for that matter. Deer is, you know, we've got some plantations where deer is a real issue. There is an opportunity to try and turn that into income for people to come and stalk, and that's great. But that we find that very unreliable, and I'd say that's one thing that we're on at growers all the time is on trying to control wild and woolly beasties who seem to think it's their divine right to come and eat your willow crop, really. But you know, it's physical barriers, it's fencing basically, or as I say, and trying to encourage people to come and control pest fly. I think it's terrible, really. I always feel very guilty about thinking that anybody should shoot a hare ever, really. But you know, again, you know, depending on the pressure, there isn't really a lot of choice there, really.
Could I just ask us to be for the general discussion now, for us to have the three pictures of the panel up rather than.
Oh, you please don't show that picture of me. I think I can tell you I'm a more handsome guy than that. Oh, well, that's really fair.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to bring Mike back in to this now. So I've got a couple of questions that have come in on the chat here. So the first one is, and this actually goes for both of you in a way, are there any landscape types you would recommend specifically for Miscanthus or Willow, or ones that you should avoid? Is there ones that you kind of, when you get the phone call or you go to site, you think you're wasting your time?
Yeah, as I say, I think the steepness of the fields, which are down here in the southwest, is more of an issue. I do refuse some of them where there's no way we're going to get across them. The other one is where it's very, very peaty ground and there's probably no structure in underneath the soil. We'd avoid those, really. But apart from that, most situations. The other one I must say is that we are reluctant to plant on grade 1 land as well.
Okay. And you, David?
Yeah, I'll just follow on from that comment you just said, Mike, about obviously at the moment we get a lot of, or I get a lot of comment about food versus fuel, and we used to say, oh, well, you know, we would never really go, you know, any land better than grade 3, grade 2 at a push. But I have to say that food security obviously is the most importance, but fuel security is also important too. And we have had inquiries from people with grade 1 who are looking at securing their own fuel supply that have said, no, I sit there, have you thought about growing some onions? Or have you thought about growing some carrots? No, we want our own source of fuel. We want to be in control of that. So I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying it is interesting that you have this food versus fuel issue, really. But no, I think one of the things that Mike mentioned about the neighbours, that's quite interesting, because we've got 1 or 2 sites that are really quite urban, and whereas I don't think we would rush away if we thought it added something to the community and one thing or another. But those sites are really difficult, not necessarily because of, to be honest, the reason is probably more to do with fly tipping. And you get stuff that's dumped in there that gets into the harvester that's really, really difficult to deal with. You could be in the situation where you end up with hazardous waste and stuff like that. So I would think twice about that. But yeah, the comments about topography and really, really overly wet sites where it's never going to drain, you're never going to be able to get onto harvesting. They're the sites you need to avoid, really.
Okay, following on from that, with both your experience in recent times, what percentage are people planting Miscanthus and Willow on arable land, and what percentage are they planting on grassland at the moment? I'll start with you, Mike.
Yeah, I would say the majority of ours is going into arable land, because we do tend to sort of try and plan forward. If we've got a grassland field, I'd rather wait down to sort of maize or cereals for a year first, try and get those pests out of the way. Not sure we would sit with it.
And you, David?
I would say it's pretty much 50-50, really. I would say I get more inquiries I'd definitely get more inquiries that would be going towards grass, but they're probably the ones that maybe don't come off for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. So I've got a question here from Judith Thornton at Aberystwyth University. She's said, how would you modify land preparation if you wanted to use Miscanthus or SR30 as a buffer strip on riparian zones, e.g. not ideal to plough grassland in the autumn and leave it over winter if it floods before planting in the spring? What are your thoughts on that?
Not sure I necessarily understand the question, Kevin.
So I guess that the closer you are to the water courses, if you're ploughing, then it could be more damaging to the water quality.
I see what you mean. Yeah. I don't see that it would be, certainly Miscanthus wouldn't be damaging to the water quality in any way. We plant on the Somerset levels, for instance, where we're going right up to the reens that are full of water. So no, not necessarily too worried about it. But you obviously need to be careful that you're not going to damage the waterways that you're planting around.
Sure. What about you, David? Have you had much experience in this as well?
I haven't, but I'm just thinking about it. I mean, if you took the common sense approach, all you would do is bring things closer together. So you're trying to do things when the ground conditions do favour being able to carry out work to a satisfactory standard. That would be the common sense solution, really.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I've got a couple of general questions here now, which are a bit of crystal ball gazing. So now, of course, it's hard to know, but what is the landscape going to be like in 10 years? How could you become climate change ready now? What could you do now to be thinking what are the eventualities, the jeopardies that might come about in 10 years' time? So I'll start with Mike. Any thoughts on that?
I think just a general picture, really, Kevin. I think if we continue for government to continue pushing us to plant trees and not to push these perennial bioenergy crops, we're going to begin to run into the problem where we're not getting rid of the carbon in the atmosphere. So I think, as a general view, this industry needs support, and it needs from government. I'm not saying money, it just needs support to talk about it so that we get these crops in the ground to start sequencing carbon now. if you plant a tree, it's going to be 20 years before it starts sequencing carbon. We need to get our fingers out and get this right.
Okay. And David, any thoughts on?
Yeah, I would agree with what you just said, Mike. I think again, we get more and more inquiries about agroforestry, and that's great. But the amount of trees that are involved in agroforestry that are going to end up being a crop with an end product, it's quite limited. I think if the support was for clumps of Miscanthus, Willow, whatever, in manageable blocks that have an end use, that are sequestering carbon and doing all the right things and have the correct level of support, has a much more adventurous approach to agroforestry than just alley farming. Which don't get me wrong, it's great, wonderful, but there's not enough fibre production or anything within those systems to make a satisfactory difference. On the practical point of view, and again, I don't know whether this means I'm an idiot or not, but within my mind, I've sat and described a system, or we've sat and described a system which is really carbon intensive, using some of the most fuel intensive operations known to agriculture, ploughing, power harrowing, and one thing and another. And I have at the back of my mind that it would be nice to try, particularly with grassland that probably been in an arable situation, is maybe to actually desiccate that with a low rate of Roundup, maybe less than a litre of Roundup, loosen it with a low disturbance subsoiler, and then direct plant into that, in the expectation that the grass will probably recover from the glyphosate. I know people that sort of do that in to undersow grass and one thing or another, and then you've never got any carbon released as a result of disturbing soil. Now I have no idea whether that would work. Every time I mention it, people look at me as if I'm an idiot, and I probably am. But I just think when Mike and I would over the moon with the systems we use, because we know it works and we know we'll get a crop and everything in the garden will be rosy. It'll not be gapping it. There'll be no gapping. It'll all be. But you think to yourself, yeah, but we've kind of burned 15 litres an hour on the plough and 15 litres an hour, knowing full well that when we come to harvest it, that's quite energy intensive as well. But there's no way around that I can see.
Mm. There's a couple of questions on peat. Mike has already mentioned it. What about growing willow on peat? How does it fare in such situations?
I've never done it. I'm trying to think. Oh yeah, we have got one. To be honest, it took away very quickly anyway, and it within the end of year one, it's about 2 meters tall. But it's not something that I really have a lot of experience with, and that's not a particularly big site. You would know a bit more about that than I would, Kevin, if I'm honest.
Do you think? Would you think it's a good idea to be growing on peat, or should we just be leaving the peat well alone to do its own carbon sequestration?
I would think probably the latter. Let's go. Horses for courses, isn't it? Really.
Sure thing. So I love the way that you described the best date of the cutting or the rhizome's life, or the most important one is that planting day. I used to work quite closely with a Swedish colleague who used to say that you've got to imagine you're planting a crop of potatoes, and that's what you need to try and achieve, that sort of seed bed. I wanted to just bring in a bit of a disclaimer, just in case anyone takes as read any of the herbicide advice provided. Of course, this doesn't replace a BASIS accredited agronomist, so that's the disclaimer over. However, herbicides are being banned left, right, and centre all the time. How is that going to create? Is it going to create problems for Willow and Miscanthus going forward? I'll go with David first, and then Mike.
Yeah, of course it will, really, and it's getting harder and harder. And again, I take my board what you said about basis certification and one thing or another. But Flexidor is very expensive, not the best chemical in the world in terms of efficacy. So I'm quite taken with the concept of a living mulch between the rows. In an ideal situation, it would probably be clover that'll fix nitrogen for willow and outcompete weeds, really. And I kind of think that's the way ahead. Again, to be fair, that was another reason for the suggestion of trying to direct plant willow into a grassland, and that at least you've got ground cover there. You know what's there, and the willow can get away more quickly than anything else. And once the willow's away, it'll shade out any other weed. But you know, like you said, chemical control is difficult. It's getting harder and harder. You know.
Yeah, completely agree with you, David. We established quite a few crops on in organic or on organic farms. We get there, but it takes us longer to get there because of weed competition. One of the stupid things is that we're moving sort of to closer and closer row spacings. We're going from sort of metre back to 3/4 metres. When they were a metre, it was easy to go through with a sort of inter-row harrow. 3/4 metres making it a little bit more difficult, but can be done.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I never mentioned, obviously, we've got the possibility of inter-row cultivation, but then every time we go through with an inter-row cultivator, there's more carbon into the atmosphere, you know?
Right. Yeah.
So one final question for both of you. Is there any benefit from being on the east side of getting early morning sunshine and being unshaded compared to being further back unshaded?
David,
Well, I'll just say I love it because I operate up and down the East Coast, so it's great for me. I think there's bound to be, isn't there? But to be honest, let's be honest, all fields have their own topography, south facing and things like that do well. We've got crops that do well on both sides of the country. I think it's got more to do with nutrition management and, you know, the general attention to detail that the grower gives it, possibly than where it's located, if I'm honest.
Yeah, quite agree with you. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Can we have that final slide back, please? So thank you very much, gentlemen. I love the phrase "every day is a school day." I treat life as every day is a school day, and I've certainly learned some new stuff today. After 30 years of being in the industry, there's always new stuff to learn. Now, the next webinar is on the 19th of January, the same time on a Thursday at 16:30. It's going to be as illuminating this when we've got two luminaries joining us there, Professor J.J. Leahy of University of Limerick and William Craycroft Ely of Terra Vesta. What we're talking about there is the emerging markets for biomass crops. Now, the great thing about these crops is that burning them was almost is not a good enough use for them because there's so many other things that you can do with them. A cascade of biorefinery potential, essentially, for all sorts of different things. And these two chaps are going to talk about tomorrow's world, which is closer than you might think. So join us then for webinar number 2. But until then, I'll just say thank you once more to Mike and David for great presentations, and we'll see you soon. Oh, I should say, of course, if you are watching online and you've liked what you've seen, please subscribe to our site and give us a like. So many thanks, and see you next time.